Music has been an inevitable part of South Africa's freedom, and as the Rainbow Nation celebrates 31 years of democracy in this coming week, we really get to unpack how freedom songs and jazz music has played an important part in the movement against apartheid within South Africa and, of course, also internationally. So we're joined by renowned multi-award-winning photographer and visionary founder of African Skies Media, Siphiwe Mhlambi. Siphiwe, good afternoon. Thank you for making time to chat with us here on the SABC at this hour.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the invite. Thank you so much.
Let's rewind the clock a little bit. Let's look at how far we've come. Perhaps to understand that, we obviously have to look at where we come from. And before we get into the music aspect of freedom, let's look at your work over the past 35 years, your experience that really started your career. How you managed to navigate the complexities of apartheid and really managed to establish a voice with images, which, as we know, speaks 1,000 words.
Well, it's always been a challenge to do something that is against, when you walk once against the wind. Things were a little bit hard, but, we always believe that anything that is challenging is worth persuading. So I went hard. Obviously, this is from 1985, 90, when we were still under apartheid, where artists used to perform behind the curtains, I remember that incident that I witnessed at Tokyo House with Abigail Kubeka, But things were just hard. But they made one curious to understand why is arts and culture and entertainment has to also be subjected to apartheid.
Yeah, because as a photographer and a documentarian, I mean, you could perhaps also just help us understand the skills and capacity that had to go into driving that message of freedom, particularly through the lens.
Correct. Well, it was my weapon,
Yes.
It was a weapon only weapon that I had. People that were before us, showed us how it's done. People like Bupita Makubani, Alf Kumalo, David Goldblatt, Yaden Shadabet. They always showed us how these things were done. So we learned from them, but we just had to elevate it further and then be more brave in executing what we believed was correct. So we did just that, and it was hard. Obviously, there was no social media, there was no internet and things that moving fast. So you get caught somehow by the police, they take your film and they expose it, and then you've got nothing left. But they just made us stronger and stronger, and then we persuaded that message.
Yeah, absolutely. Because speaking about your weapon of choice, I mean, it also evolved across different mediums. So then, music also enters the fray. But I think just before we get into that, using art as activism, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the importance of you having chosen entertainment as a means to spread the message against, apartheid and the system at large.
Yeah. Well, all of us were active, and then we had to be involved during the days when I was growing up. I mean, I picked up the camera when I was 13 years old, and everything around me was questionable because obviously we don't know. You just imagine and you see things that are different, So I was very curious. I couldn't go I joined the media. I worked for the papers. And still working for the papers, it was even more dangerous for me because I was not willing to cross the country, go on exile and all of that. So I opted to stay home, but then still persuading the fight with arts and culture, especially with music. There was a lot of message that was passed that was liberating us, from the songs, and the theater, plays by Segunjalo, African Footprint, Umoja, all of those. The message was strong. It was just a matter of me taking it and packaging it and then sharing it with the world, And I think it made a big impact in doing that.
Yeah, well, we are reminded when music hits, you feel no pain. And I mean, if we're looking at the power that music has had in terms of fighting, for freedom, the messaging through that medium, tell us a little bit more about using that instrument of choice. What was evoked, how it was strengthened to intensify that fight?
Well, the idea that I'm always happy with is that it gave birth to, we multiplied. So the system couldn't defeat us with one dimensional. So that's what I'm saying. There were various revenues. It's a stage play, it's a theater, it's a movie, it's jazz concerts, it's all of those, and even the rallies and the marches. So we could not be contained into one formula. So we spread the message across the board in every angle that we could, but we multiplied. And I remember watching Sarafina. I was a little bit young, but and when I saw it, and I thought, this is what we need to do. So, yeah, it carried on.
Yes, it was also really about asserting and celebrating Black identity and
Absolutely.
using it as a means of, defiance and also just cultural resistance, which was much needed at the time given the common enemy, and just even dismantling the social constructs that have now been deemed a crime against humanity. When you look at the greats and the most influential musicians that you were able to work with alongside, also collaborate with, I mean, tell us a little bit more about those experiences. I don't know how you're going to condense all those years into this answer, but perhaps you could speak to the liberation of it all through music in that context.
For me, I think, when you do a project like this, it needs you to be involved in it. You can't do it on the surface, and you can't do it from outside. So people that noticed what I was doing, they gave me advices. People like Siphiwe Mhlambi, Brahim Masikela. And I remember would sit at Yvonne Chaka Chaka's house in Bryanston with Mama Miriam Makeba, and sort of giving you the insight on how you should send your message. So I got too much involved. It became almost personal. And for the extent that I had to resign my work where I used to work for Media 24 in 1998. When I resigned and I took on this full time because there was just a lot to do. And obviously going forward, and I end up having these exhibitions, annual exhibitions that I have called Expressions, where we dissect all the topics that we have within the industry. It's been going on since 1998 up to today. So I'm just committed to doing something like that.
Well, that legacy of freedom continues because we are 31 years into our democracy as well. And, through the arts, through entertainment, through music, we've seen how it also garnered international solidarity and created that unity. And if we're looking at how multilateralism, was pushed, we're seeing, a move towards nationalism and protectionism. This really is in contrast to that vision of unity at large. So tell us a little bit more about this era, this juncture, 31 years into a democracy, the difference that we're witnessing in relation to the role that arts and music plays in spreading the message, in spreading, the message of freedom, particularly in Freedom Month for us.
To see that we've had a mark. You look at today's music. You look at what my piano have done. You look at the shake that we have. Like I said, we always so contained that thinking that we can't do this. But the multiplication that we did, it makes me proud to see that we come this far. Although we're still far from getting it right, having our artists, in the state that they are right now. But obviously doing the greater work, and I don't want to point fingers between politicians and musicians, but they are playing their role in a way that has brought the country to be where it is today. And it's just a matter of more push. We still have a lot of work to do. I think especially with genres like jazz, theater and all of that, it's really a lot of work to do, I must just say that.
Yes, particularly for artists who played a pivotal role. There have been debates and, much needed cries about protection, royalties, and just legislation at large that empowers them, given the evolution and perhaps also the modes of consumption, which has become, really important as we navigate towards this digital era as well. But as we, navigate the complexities of that, I also want to look at African skies at large, because at this point, perhaps you can also help us understand what exactly you do there. Are you also part of succession planning, also assisting those who are going to obviously take over once that baton is handed over? Tell us a little bit more about that in assisting for the future.
Yes, that is very important. We have to have that succession. Hence, I'm saying with African Skies, the commitment that I do, I have my first book. I published my first book on jazz now. I think that's the message. And obviously, there's more to follow. But the succession plan is there that we just keep carrying on. I won an award, and I went to Prague last year as the World Jazz Photographer of the Year, which that tells me that we are doing something correct here at Mzansi. It's just a matter of people noticing what we do. It might be hard for some, but we will just carry the message that we have.
And so speaking about World Jazz Photographer of the Year, I mean, as someone who really collaborates with big brands, you've got the Joy of Jazz, Standard Bank Joy of Jazz, and various other initiatives for this Freedom Day. Are we likely to see any more moments being captured by you yet again? What can we expect?
I will tell you one thing that I applaud people like Peter Tlaj, at
Yes.
Joy of Jazz. There's few people that are behind the scenes, Bulindelwa at VET, Simon Ndlovu, Gwen Ansel, Professor David Coltrane, everybody behind the scenes. I mean, the work that we are doing is so great that we're just on the right track, that we have just to keep pushing it. But ultimately, then we'll get to a point where we don't have to really worry about who's not doing it, who's suffering in that. Because, I mean, we're losing artists as well at the same time. But they are, throughout their life, they were just on that fight of giving us this democracy that we need and then uplifting us in culture.
Well, because the story of the world is incomplete without our version. And so thank you for being part of that narrative. Thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you for also weighing in on this Freedom Day discussion, particularly linked to jazz, the role that it obviously played in our freedom and really navigating the complexities of it, what else we can expect for the next 31 years into our democracy.